policy. Formulation of the 2012 Farm Bill will come to order. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today for our final Farm Bill field hearing. Congressman Huelskamp, thank you for hosting us in your district. I like doing things in the neighborhood coming from just across the line to the south. And I want to thank all of our witnesses for joining us today and extend a particular welcome to Scott Neufeld, who's come up from my great state of Oklahoma. I'll talk about him a little later. This hearing is a continuation of a process that started in the spring of 2010. Today we'll build upon the information we've gathered in those hearings, as well as the 11 farm policy audits we conducted this past summer. We use those audits as an opportunity to thoroughly evaluate farm programs, to identify areas where we could improve efficiency. The field hearings serve a slightly different purpose, though. Today we're here to listen. I talk to producers all the time back in Oklahoma. I see them at the feed store, I meet them in my town hall meetings. Of course, I get regular updates from my boss, Linda Lucas, back home on the range. Yes, those of you who know Linda understand exactly what I mean by that. But I can tell you that the past 3 field hearings have demonstrated the tremendous diversity of agriculture in this country. We started in New York, where the farming operations tend to be smaller, and there are probably more trees in 1 acre than you have in most counties in the big 1st District of Kansas town. We learned how farm policy affects specialty crop growers and dairy producers in the Northeast. Next was Illinois, where we saw vast corn and soybean fields and heard how crop insurance is a critical risk management tool for farmers in the Corn Belt. In Arkansas, we saw quite a few irrigated fields. Yes, as a Western Okie, I was living this, that. And we heard why crop insurance isn't quite as effective a risk management tool in the Southeast. Today we'll hear from a wide variety of producers who will no doubt have a different perspective than we've got in those other regions. That's why it's so important that we offer a choice of policy options. The broader range of agricultural production in our country is what makes our country strong. And it also creates challenges when we're trying to write a single farm bill that supports so many different regions and commodities. While each sector has unique concerns when it comes to farm policy, I'd like to share some of my general goals for the next farm bill. First and foremost, I want to give producers the tools to help you do what you do best, and that is produce the safest, most abundant, most affordable food supply literally in the history of the world. To do this, we must develop a farm bill that works for all regions and all commodities. It has to take into account the diversity of agriculture in America, even within commodities. Different programs work better for different regions. That's why it's virtually important, vitally I should say, important that the commodity title give producers options so they can choose the program that works best for them, whether it is by protecting revenue or price. I'm also committed to providing a strong crop insurance program for our producers. The committee has heard loud and clear the importance of crop insurance and will be the backbone of our safety net. We look for areas to improve crop insurance as we move forward. Lastly, we'll work to ensure that producers can continue using conservation programs to protect our natural resources. I'm particularly curious as to your thoughts on how to simplify the process so they are easier for our farmers and ranchers to use. Beyond those priorities, I know there are a number of universal concerns facing agriculture across the country. For instance, my producers in Oklahoma are worried about regulations coming down from the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, and how they must comply with those regulations. I'm also aware that the death tax is creating difficulties for farming operations. I want to hear how these federal policies are affecting producers here. Today, we'll be hearing from a selection of producers. Unfortunately, we don't have time to hear from everybody who would like to share their perspectives. We have a place on our website where you can submit your comments in writing. You can visit agriculture.house.gov/farm bill to find that form. You can also find the address where postcards are available around the room, I believe. As I said before, we don't have an easy road ahead of us, but I'm confident that by working together, we can craft a farm bill that continues to support the successful story that American agriculture agriculture is. And with that, I would turn to our host, my colleague from the House Agriculture Committee, Mr. Huelskamp, for any comments he might offer.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased and honored to host this bill hearing for the House Ag Committee, not far from my hometown of Fowler and not far from our family farm. I appreciate you and Congressman Conaway and others that have taken the time and effort to hear what producers think about the Farm Bill. And what a fantastic place to be here and to hear that in the region once known as the Great American Desert. Pioneers turned it into one of the most productive agricultural areas in the world, with hundreds of thousands of acres of wheat and corn and milo and soybeans, and cotton, and millions of head of cattle and pigs, and not to mention ethanol and dairy production. And we do this in a time of mixed news, a lingering and devastating drought throughout much of the plains, high commodity prices and record exports matched with high costs for inputs and machinery and even a land price boom, an aging producer population and labor shortages, a slew of expensive government regulations from the EPA, USDA, Departments of Labor, and Transportation. Additionally, we're all aware of the financial situation in Washington, overspending that's led to a massive debt problem. As America's farmers and ranchers, we will do our fair share, I believe, to solve this problem, but so should the more than 80% of the Farm Bill spending for food stamps and other welfare programs. And we also expect Washington to do with less regulation, less mandates, and less control over our way of life. Writing farm policy is especially difficult because so many variables affecting agriculture. Market volatility, monetary policy, international competition, the weather, and of course, new regulations out of Washington. With these in mind, the next Farm Bill must be designed with maximum flexibility and effective risk management for our farmers and ranchers as we feed a growing and hungry world. In order to meet these goals, it's absolutely critical we actually listen and learn from the concerns and common sense of America's farmers and ranchers. So let me again thank you all for coming to share your thoughts with the committee, and I look forward to hearing from you today.
Thank you, Congressman Huelskamp. The chair would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record so that witnesses may be given testimony and ensure that there's ample time for questions. With that, I'd like to welcome our first panel of witnesses to the table. Mr. Gary Harshberger, corn, wheat, milo, soybean, and cow-calf producer, Dodge City, Kansas. Mr. Keith Miller, wheat, sorghum, corn, soybean, and cow-calf producer, Great Bend, Kansas. Mr. Dee Vaughan, corn, cotton, sorghum, soybean, and wheat producer, Dumas, Texas. Mr. Scott Neufeld, wheat, sorghum, canola, alfalfa, cow-calf producer from Fairview, Oklahoma. And indulge me for a moment as the chairman of the committee to note that while he didn't put it in his bio, he and his wife Brenda and their 2 kids were recently named the Oklahoma Farm Bureau Family of the Year. I think that's very impressive, and thank you, Scott, for bringing the real boss in your operation, Brenda, with you today also. And with that, Mr. Terry Swanson. Mr. Swanson, corn, wheat, sorghum, sunflower, and cow-calf producer, Walsh, Colorado. And with that, let's turn to appropriately our friend from Dodge City. You may begin.
Good morning. Is this on? Good morning, Chairman Lucas, Representative Huelskamp, and Representative Conaway. Welcome to Western Kansas. Kansas's first congressional district and is the number one agriculture producing congressional district in the nation. It is my honor to sit before you today and offer my perspective on farm policy as the committee shapes the next Farm Bill. Thank you for holding this hearing in Kansas, and to thank all of you for being here. My name is Gary Harshberger. I'm a 4th generation Ford County farmer. After graduating college in 1987, I returned to the family farm. However, I can proudly say that I started farming roughly about the age of 10. Today, we raise corn, milo, wheat, soybeans, and some cattle. I currently serve as chairman of the Kansas Water Authority, serve on the Bonanza Bioenergy Board, as well as the Arcata Energy Board of Directors. I know that ag programs have done more than their fair share to reduce federal spending, and yet this bill will be written with much less money. Thank you for your efforts in trying to develop a farm package that works and can sustain farmers through the next 5 years. My testimony today will focus on 5 critical areas as it relates to my operation. First of all, while this committee does not have jurisdiction over this particular area, I must share my concern with overregulation. On one hand, the government wants to cut farm protection, and on the other, it wants to saddle us with costly regulations proposed by out-of-touch politicians and bureaucrats. The child labor laws stemming from the Department of Labor, as well as diesel engine regulations coming from the EPA, are just two examples of regulatory burdens that cost my farm and consumers money. Over-regulation is cumbersome and costly and presents more of a threat to our nation's agriculture than possibly with the farm. On to the farm policy. I know this committee has heard from producers across the U.S. that crop insurance is the most important program to protect in the next farm bill. I would like to echo that fact. The impact of the recent drought is a testament to the uncertainty farmers face each year, and the need to rely on crop insurance can never be more clear. There are many ways to strengthen the program, such as a personal T-yield system to current APH methodology, allowing producers' APHs to be more accurately reflect his yield potential. I would also like to see a better system in place for ensuring limited irrigation practices. As water supplies diminish and water conservation practices are adopted, crop insurance should reflect this trend. RMA needs to be encouraged to implement the proposed limited irrigation crop insurance programs for 2013. Finally, please keep crop insurance tools purchased by producers protected from environmental compliance requirements or any other payment limitations that limit conditions that do not belong tied to insurance. There have been many policy avenues that have been offered by the commodity title. Shallow loss and deep loss have both been discussed. I believe a new program should protect yield and price in some form, as well as allow for flexibility. If revenue type program is used, I believe a minimum price yield and minimum price and plug yield should be included in a revenue-based program. My input prices have dramatically increased since the time we began farming. Recently, we have enjoyed higher commodity prices and positive profit margins. However, historically, this shows that this will not last, as inputs costs will increase until they meet or exceed the cost of production. Last year, for instance, I just saw a $48,000 increase in the price of a combine. I feel a minimum price will protect against large drop in commodity prices, and plug yields will help in times of consecutive years of yield loss, such as in a drought this would extend. A farm bill should provide assistance when I suffer losses beyond my control. I need a simple program in case my operation suffers a disaster. Acre and Sure did not provide the efficiency and simplicity farmers needed. And while current low and countercyclical programs are simple, production costs have continued to rise, making 2008 levels no longer relevant to the realities of the costs today. Water conservation is something I'm very passionate about. Last year's drought has dramatically affected the water supply in my region, as many others tried to overlog the aquifer. We need to build stronger incentives for fruit producers to plant less water-intensive agriculture commodities, strengthen existing programs like AWEP, where dollars are already being used toward water conservation, and allow use of conservation practices that use new technologies currently eligible within the NRCS's Conservation Stewardship Program, all of which could benefit groundwater conservation. Lastly, I support the continuation of the Farm Energy Bill title. It's imperative our country sustains our national security, and programs in the energy title, like the bioenergy program for advanced biofuels, have been positive for the U.S. I am proud that I produce local grains that go to local ethanol plants and contribute to renewable fuel sources that reduce our dependence on foreign oil and putting billions of dollars back into our local economies instead of sitting overseas. Many people talk today about cutting the energy title from the Farm Bill, and some even question the renewable fuel standard in general. We have to remember that energy policy has been instrumental in maintaining our markets for our grain, as input prices and regulations have continued to increase tremendously. Cutting the legs out from underneath ethanol or biofuels at this time would be catastrophic. In closing, I'd like to reiterate that crop insurance is critical. I believe that the commodity title should be as simple as possible, as to allow producers flexibility for what works best in their region and on their farm. Finally, water and biofuels are critical to our local economies, and programs in the conservation and energy titles that benefit us in producing domestic biofuels and sustaining our water should be supported. Thank you, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, good to begin when you're ready.
Mr. Chairman, ranking members, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to join us today and share some thoughts on the necessity of an economic safety net for farmers and how possible improvements to the current program will allow us to achieve these goals. I currently farm in the middle of Kansas, at Great Bend, Kansas, and serve on the board of directors of Kansas Farm Bureau and am the past chairman of the United States Meat Export Federation. But I'm here today under my own steam and grateful for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you. Mr. Chairman, please allow me to thank you publicly for having Representative Huelskamp host this hearing here in the great city of Dodge City, and we're glad that he did that for us. So we appreciate that, Jim. Crop insurance is an important part of my operation and is imperative to it. Protection and enhancement of crop insurance programs ranks as the #1 priority from a long list of farm organizations throughout the United States, and I cannot agree more. Agriculture is a highly erratic industry and is influenced by many variables, and some are beyond the producer's control. We can control seed, fertilizer, and those types of inputs, but we cannot control the weather and the markets. Simply put, during the development of the 2012 Farm Bill, crop insurance must be a priority. Enterprise units would allow farmers to access quality coverage at a lower rate. These units are being used in certain areas, and we're having trouble with the irrigated and the dry land differential. Because currently, if you insure under one, you have to be for both. We need more flexibility in that program. Limited irrigation should be a focus of the new program, and we should look for ways that we can do that in the new farm bill. Limited irrigation will only help conserve the water supply, which is so very limited here in the United States. Declining yields is another problem that we're having with our crop insurance, and it's because of the excessive amount of drought years and crop failures. Under the current situation, the production history will go down and it increase costs to our consumers through their premiums. We need to find a better way of keeping the crop in that system. Improving data collection, like many others, data is very, very important. And the technology on my farm, it only seems right that we should improve the data collection that FSA and RMA are using, especially tying crop insurance together with our other reporting services. So we would encourage you to work on that. Reform, as you know, the cuts in crop insurance for the last few years have been between $12 and $20 billion. Additional cuts would likely increase premiums to our producers and make it unable for a lot of producers to be able to purchase it. We simply cannot afford additional cuts in today's high-risk marketplace. Conservation, let me switch gears. I live right next to the Shining Bottoms, and conservation is a very, very important part of my operation. I currently use EQIP in several different ways to try and limit the amount of erosion in our area and preserve that wetland. Regulation, as you know, has been a major part or problem coming from from DC. The CAFO's regulations, EPA regulations, Clean Water Act, all of them have been giving us a lot more new regulations coming down, and we're having trouble meeting all those regulations, and we sure would encourage you to try and limit them. Exports, I couldn't tell you enough about exports and global economy and how the amount of opportunities we have there. The market access program is crucial for that to stay in business. The multi-year impact of increased market development spending is equal to $35 in agriculture export gains for every dollar expended. That's a $35 to 1 return on investment. That is crucial for the future of the United States to keep that program intact. So in closing, I would encourage you to read my entire written testimony, because there's a lot more facts and figures that are in that. And I sure thank you for the opportunity for me to be able to share my thoughts with you as a committee.
Thank you. Mr. Vaughn, you may begin when you're ready.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for holding this hearing here today. My name is Dee Vaughan, and I am a corn, cotton, sorghum, and soybean and wheat producer in Dumas, Texas. I currently serve as president of the Southwest Council of Agribusiness, an organization comprised of 17 farm groups, 30 lending institutions, and about 70 Main Street businesses in Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Colorado, and also here in Kansas. I want to begin by thanking this committee for working hard to develop a consensus farm bill this last fall that not only would have met the needs of all producers, all regions, all crops, but will have done so in a way that would have saved over $23 billion for the taxpayers. I believe this year's farm bill process should build upon the excellent work that was done last fall. There is one particular aspect of your work that I want to especially thank you for, and that is your focus on price protection. If Washington is truly serious about saving taxpayer dollars, less government intervention, price-based protection in the farm bill is the way to go about it. Think about a farm bill that provides meaningful price protection relative to today's production cost and a price situation that can still end up not costing the taxpayer a dime for this protection over the next 5 years. Conversely, if history is any guide, you can be sure that a farm bill built on price protection, if needed, will prove to be the cheapest of the alternatives that have been presented before you. In short, a price-based farm bill policy that only kicks in when it is absolutely necessary is the conservative, fiscally responsible, and market-oriented approach that we should be striving to achieve. It seems that much of the farm bill discussion is centered on revenue-based options, but there are concerns about this route. First, I think there's been enough bad PR about direct payments over the last few years that producers want to avoid receiving any kind of a payment unless it is absolutely necessary. I also think there is concern about the fact that no policy should be so rich that it drives up input costs and land costs, not to mention the criticism. Second, I think there is a big concern that revenue approaches cut off helping producers just when they need it the very most, when revenue really drops, mainly due to prolonged periods of low prices. That's exactly when producers need farm policy most, and that's exactly when revenue approaches offer the least protection. Third, while I agree that revenue does not exactly duplicate what crop insurance does, there is at least some crossover, especially in the minds of the public, and especially in the minds of the critics of the farm bill and crop insurance. It is important to remember in this exercise that we must pass a good farm bill, but we must also be able to defend it later. In my view, what was so important about what you did last fall is that you ensured that even if a producer chose a revenue option, there would be price protection for that producer if the bottom fell out, price-wise. You also worked to protect crop insurance from harm, which is a top priority as identified by farmers from across the country. And I totally agree, whatever you do, please do not harm crop insurance. Proposals to link conservation compliance and impose a payment limit cap on crop insurance are thinly veiled attempts to kill insurance for farmers. No question about it. From my perspective, at least the supplemental coverage option included in your plan last fall can serve very well as the revenue component of the farm bill and do so without the negatives that I've mentioned about the revenue options. In closing, I firmly believe that if you ask rank and file farmers, no matter the crop, no matter the region of the country, the vast majority of them would tell you that if they were writing the farm bill, they would ensure that there is real price protection and that crop insurance would not be harmed in the process, but improved. Maybe it is the West Texan in me, but I tend to think that the right answer is usually the plain one. Washington should keep it simple. We rely on crop insurance for what it does best, protect against production risk. We need an equally effective policy that provides protection against low prices over a sustained period of time, such as we experienced in the late 1990s and early 2000s. While shallow losses can be devastating if they are repetitive, the risk producers fear most is a drop in commodity prices to the low cost of production that lasts for several years. Thank you for the opportunity to present my views on the 2012 Farm Bill, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you. Scott, will you begin when you're ready?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Huelskamp, Mr. Conaway, members of the committee.
Turn that microphone just a little bit more toward you.
Thank you for holding this hearing on the Farm Bill. My name is Scott Neufeld, and I'm a third-generation farmer operating in a partnership with my father. We have a diversified operation producing wheat, alfalfa hay for dairy use, canola, and grain sorghum. We also have a cow-calf herd, and we graze stocker cattle on wheat pasture when the conditions allow. My wife and I have been very active in the Oklahoma Farm Bureau, and I currently chair the Farm Bill Advisory Committee. If I were to sum up my views on the Farm Bill, my advice would be straightforward and twofold. First, please keep federal crop insurance strong and use the opportunity to make improvements. And second, make the focus of the Farm Bill be about addressing price protection during a multi-year downturn, a risk that crop insurance was never designed to address. If Washington does these two things, this Farm Bill will be a great success. It's a testimony to the success of crop insurance protection and the current Farm Bill that producers are planting again this spring and moving forward with no outcry for ad hoc disaster assistance. The risk management tools that were in place during our recent drought were adequate and cheaper than funding additional disaster programs. Areas where crop insurance can be improved track closely with the recommendations that Chairman Lucas and his colleagues made last fall. These recommendations include improving actual production histories to deal with multiple year losses so those APHs ultimately insurance coverage reflect true production potential. I also appreciate the extension of enterprise units and the ability to divide enterprise units from irrigated versus non-irrigated practices. Separate from the Farm Bill, I appreciate this committee's leadership in closely monitoring what USDA is doing on re-rating crop insurance. In an effort to try to lower rates for some producers, I'm concerned that it may price the rest of the country out of coverage. I also strongly oppose applying payment limits and means testing to crop insurance. The agricultural economy has driven many family-owned operations to become larger to spread risk and investment in capital. Why would we penalize the larger producer by restricting the amount of protection they would be allowed? We need to change our mindset to a per acre basis, not a per operator basis. I also oppose entangling crop insurance with existing conservation compliance requirements, and I urge members of Congress to oppose this effort. As to the need for real price protection on the Farm Bill side of the equation, nearly everyone in this room can probably remember back to 2008 when we saw wheat prices climb to upwards of $12 to $13 per bushel. And we all thought we had reached a new plateau. But then, a year later, in the 2009 marketing year, we can all remember seeing those prices drop dramatically to levels we thought we would never see again. I can remember going to the elevator the day that I saw wheat prices with a 3 in front of them and thinking to myself, how am I going to make this work? Many producers were forced to sell at that level as well. While short-lived, it reminded me that the input costs that we deal with every day don't cycle as fast as the price is being bid at the elevator. On this issue, here is my deep concern. All the revenue program ideas floating around out there will not provide the kind of protection farmers need if the depressed prices we just talked about remain in place for several years. If stuck at those levels, Washington would be inundated by calls for costly and unbudgeted emergency relief legislation. Neither taxpayers nor farmers can afford to go down that road again. So I call on Congress to focus the Farm Bill on providing real price protection for farmers in these periods of prolonged low prices. Fortunately, thanks to the chairman and the work of his committee, the 2011 package to the Select Committee would have met this basic test. I would also like to stress the importance of NAP and the livestock forage program to livestock producers like myself. Producers in my area also value the CSP and the EQIP programs. These initiatives, along with the MAP and foreign market development, along with aggressive agricultural research, are all modest in investment dollars, but still unsung heroes in U.S. farm policy. So let me finish where I started. As producers, we have two factors that affect our ability to be successful: yield and price. Please do not harm, but build on crop insurance to provide yield protection. And please don't stray from the main mission of the Farm Bill, that is providing a safety net by offering sound, multi-year price protection. Passage of a 2012 Farm Bill would provide much needed certainty to the future of agriculture and the businesses that support it. Thank you for allowing me to testify today.
Thank you. Mr. Swanson, turn that microphone just a little bit more towards you and begin with you.
Thank you to you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Conaway, Mr. Huelskamp. Appreciate the opportunity to testify today. My name is Terry Swanson, and I farm and ranch in southeast Colorado with my wife, Marcella, and my son, Miles, and his family. Our farm is located 20 miles from Kansas and 20 miles from Oklahoma. Our principal crops are grain and forage sorghum, wheat, corn, and sunflowers, all grown under dryland conditions. Our cattle operation includes a cow-calf enterprise and growing stock of feeder cattle. I'm here to speak on behalf of my operation and others like it in my area. Why am I here? This is a question I think that has to be answered first. My son is a fourth-generation farmer in Backett County and is raising the fifth generation to make its home there. We want to contribute to the nation's food supply and in turn to its economy by providing an ample, reasonably priced, secure, safe food supply. In turn, we expect to be able to live and have our being in a relatively safe, secure agricultural environment that will sustain us and those who come after us. It's important for me to acknowledge the work that the committee did last fall, presenting the Super Committee with a package that not only addressed the needs of the ag community, but it also saved our nation $23 billion. The product that the committee did put together did all of the virtually all of the things that I'm going to talk about here today. You should be proud, and we are grateful. We have had an unfortunate cropping sequence for the last 8 to 10 years in southeast Colorado. The rotation is 1 year of good crops, and the other one is 1 year of indemnity payments. And those things are the only thing we've had to take to the bank. Therefore, I strongly feel that the next Farm Bill must have, like the rest of the people on the panel, have crop insurance as its backbone. Please do no harm to crop insurance, but rather improve it with better APH methodology and a T-yield system. Workable insurance products for forage sorghum and trimmed yields will also help for all crops. The commodity title. Like crop insurance, the commodity title must provide provisions for systemic risks, such as drought, to be viable for this area of southwest Kansas, Oklahoma Panhandle, Texas Panhandle, and all of eastern Colorado. There's two kinds of risks. One of them is production risk, and the other is price risk. For the next Farm Bill to accomplish the goals that we have set before us, we must address both. As you can see, I have enough gray hair to show you that I've experienced both of these risks many, many times. And you can't afford to ignore either one. The end product expressed in the commodity title must not favor one crop over another at sign-up. I must be able to choose my cropping decisions agronomically at the farm rather than at the FSA office, choosing whichever program will pay the best. The program offered should not only pay out with loss. I should be able to provide the producer, it should be able to provide the producer a bridge between successful crops and markets and those that are difficult due to circumstances beyond the farmer's control. These circumstances can be environmental factors, or they can be market influences that are unforeseen and therefore unable to be offset with other risk management tools. I wanted to bring with me a bag of soil. I was going to call it a bag of dirt, but my son is a soils major and he said you have to call it soil. But I was advised otherwise. But everything that we do starts with the dirt. If we don't take care of the dirt, it won't take care of us. Therefore, I'm passionate about conservation. I live in the epicenter of the Dust Bowl. I know the effects of poor conservation practices. I've implemented CSP and EQIP contracts and their associated practices on my farm and my ranch. And I've seen immediate positive results from the technical support and the financial remuneration that these programs can provide. They provide a segue from current practices to those of enhanced conservation, not only for this generation of producers, but for for all who are on the land in the future, and I might add, as an investment in the sustainability of this nation's food supply. We live in a very water-sensitive area. Crop that I raise a lot of, sorghum, is the most water-efficient crop that we have available. I would hope that we could have that efficiency be expressed and encouraged in the conservation type. Again, provide the producer with the right choices, and he will effectively and safely produce an ample food for this country's nutrition and security as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions, and would note to my colleagues, with the kind of bright and insightful panels we have on both this and the next panel, we'll have some definite flexibility in the amount of time we're using. Mr. Vaughan, you're probably aware that a letter from a few of our national commodity groups was sent to the United States Senate yesterday. Are you a member of any of those groups?
Yes, sir, I am.
Not to put you on the spot, but just simply ask. The letter suggests that corn growers oppose any form of price protection. As a corn grower, do you agree with that perspective?
No, I'm a former president of that organization, and I'm a member of the Soybean Association, Farm Bureau member, and member of the wheat growers, and I do not agree with that statement that was made in there that they do not support a price-based protective system. And that's what we need. That's what we need out here in the country. We have multi-year losses like we had in 1997 through 2005.
They seem to say, or imply, says the phrase, that it would distort planning decisions and that a shallow loss revenue plan based on the last 5 years of revenue will not. Do you have any concerns with that statement?
Yes, I do. Isn't it true that basically the Farm Bill distorts planning in and of itself? I mean, what is the purpose of the Farm Bill? Is to keep farmers producing, so that we don't have a situation where we create a huge surplus and then prices go to the bottom and farmers can't get money to the plant, and so they just have to stop for a year. How would that system work? I mean, it takes a year. We're not like an auto plant where we shut down for 3 or 4 weeks and let supply and demand come back into balance. It takes a year to grow a crop, and so we have to keep producing. We need price protection that enables us to, for lenders to keep lending, rural America to keep working, and farmers to keep farming. So with that said, I would say all policies distort plantings to a certain extent, even crop insurance, the way it's structured. I mean, we have to set a stake in the ground and say, okay, this is the crop price, a guaranteed crop price for the year for crop insurance. But what if it changes 3 or 4 more times during the year? Obviously, what that planting guarantee is for crop insurance has an influence on prices or on crop plantings. So even if crop insurance has distorted of plantings to some extent, the idea that revenue doesn't, I can't buy into that, because a farmer, if prices are low for all commodities, which they generally are all at the same time, and a farmer goes in and he looks at it and he says, okay, I grow corn and soybeans, I'm going to look at my revenue guarantee under my revenue plan, I'm going to look at my crop insurance guarantee, and I'm going to plant corn if it's the best one under that system, or I'll plant soybeans if it's the best. And so even that revenue plan, that's where I disagree when they say that the revenue plan is not going to distort plantings to any extent at all. I think that's totally false.
Fair statement. Scott, why don't crop insurance and these revenue programs provide the adequate price protection you need from your perspective?
Well, from my perspective, obviously, we set a base price in crop insurance usually in the fall months for us wheat producers, and then there's a harvest price set during the month of harvest, usually in the month of June, and you get the greater of those two. If perchance we get into those years of multi-year low prices and we have $3.5, $4.5 prices that are set for those target prices and base prices during those times, and you multiply that by your yield, your revenue guarantee is well below your break even. And the crop insurance, the way crop insurance prices are set, if we get into years of multi-low prices, the revenue guarantees don't guarantee us a break even anymore. Where this year, it's just the opposite, actually. With this year, we had some great prices set during the fall, and we have good revenue guarantees. But if we can, and our guarantees are well above our break evens now, or they're going to provide us a profit anyway.
Exactly. You rightly point out that there are a great number of people out there who are misinformed in your testimony about the importance of direct payments. Can you give us an appreciation for the relevance of the direct payments to your operation? The direct payments that have been the foundation of the safety net of the last 3 quarters.
Direct payments to my operation have amounted to anywhere between an $8 to an $11 per acre type of payment. What can that do for us? What has it done for me on my farm? It's allowed me to replace equipment that needs to be replaced. It allowed me to buy some crop insurance, possibly buy up coverage on crop insurance. And I think one thing that we don't see in direct payments are all the dollars that are pumped into these rural economies through direct payments are spent locally. So we don't often talk about the support that it has been to our rural economies, but those dollars in essence are rural economic development as well.
And if my colleagues would indulge me, I'll continue. If you also expand, there are some folks that if they have their way, that would limit, put a pay limit of $40,000 on the portion of your premium the government shares. How would that impact your ability to insure your crop? Obtain loans from the banker, and how would it affect young farmers who are just starting out?
And that's a good question. The payment limits on crop insurance premiums probably would not directly affect my operation because I'm not large enough to get into those levels where that would, but I know many family-owned corporations that it would affect their ability to buy the level of crop insurance that they would desire. A young producer just starting out, would it level the playing field for them? I'm not sure. It probably wouldn't, but it does. Crop insurance doesn't give us a bankable guarantee that when we go to the bank, we can say this is the amount of revenue that I'm going to get regardless of the price or the yield that happens to me.
And my farmers remind me, your neighbors, our fellow neighbors in Oklahoma, that all those records have to be in that loan portfolio file. That it's not just the banker that wants it, it's the examiners who demand the bankers have that in the file, so it's critically important. Mr. Swanson, you talk about the importance of foreign policy not influencing producers' planning decisions. Given what you know about the effort last fall, in your judgment, would that policy have influenced your planning decisions if the Farm Bill had become the effort in the Supercommittee become the Farm Bill?
I'll have to yield to what Mr. Vaughan said. I think all things influence your planning decisions, and it probably absolutely would. However, if we have, for instance, if we had price protection and it was equitable across the board, that should not influence your decision just because of that price protection. And so those things that were put forth, I think, were influenced. It influenced it, but influenced it probably in a minimal amount.
I guess to go straight to the point, the reference prices discussed in the 2000 Farm Bill effort, would that have addressed your concern about the need for price protection in periods of low prices?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, kind of a philosophical question. You mentioned you've grown your operation in the testimony from 400 acres that your father farmed to 7,500 now. When you listen to the national dialogue, are you led to believe that large farms are bad and the idea of the ideal farm is small, family-owned farm? Can you explain why you chose, if you listen to the national dialogue, that's what you believe based on what you hear. Can you explain your choice to expand, and could you sustain your family today on that 400 acres your father farmed in 1976? I know it's almost a silly question to ask, but it's relevant for the record.
No, there's no way that we could survive on the 400 acres my father had when we started. The reason I grow my farm is we pool assets. We pool machinery, we pool capital, we pool buying power for buying large volumes of seed, fertilizer, and everything else. And it's made the operation of our farm a lot cheaper per acre. My farm actually includes 2 other operators with me, my nephew and my daughter and husband. And they absolutely could not start without me helping them. And by pooling everything together, we have the opportunity to do so.
Absolutely. My time's expired, and I appreciate the indulgence of our colleagues. I now turn to the gentleman from Texas, the chairman of the General Farm Commodities Subcommittee, and a fellow who may have even fewer trees than you have or I have at home, Mr. Conaway.
Well, I do represent a community called No Trees. First got on the committee, the chairman put me on the forestry subcommittee. Went to the city limits of No Trees, Texas, had a picture taken by the city limits sign, and gave the chairman to say, I'm probably not the right guy to deal with forestry concerns. Thank you, Chairman. I am reminded, though, that sharing questions with the chairman is like sharing a hamburger with a lion.
I learned everything I know from Bad Roberts.
I'm his setup guy, in case you're curious.
I was back then too.
I would like this, I think Mr. Miller, maybe Harshberger may have missed it as well. In terms of crop insurance, the differentials or the differences between irrigated practices and dryland farming, and how that would work if you were somehow to bifurcate insurance units into separate. Can you kind of walk me through how you envision that would work?
Well, what I'm concerned about is right now it's either dry land or it's irrigated. And if we would buy the enterprise units, we could have 8 separate enterprises that have both irrigated and dry land.
In the same unit?
Yeah, well, yes.
Okay.
We need to do something to be able to differentiate, because our irrigation yields for corn in our area are in the 140 to 170 range, and dry lands in the 50 to 60, and you can't commingle them, and it's a real mess for us. So somehow we need to address that issue. And the limited irrigation is also a real major issue with that, because like last year, everybody told us we ought to shut our wells down because everything was a total disaster. But crop insurance, when we had them insured for definitely for irrigation, they said we had to keep running them, and that was just water being wasted because the crop was already done.
The GAO report on a bit self-serving on the folks who asked for the report. Can you guys, each of you, walk us through how the impact of the $40,000 limit and/or tying conservation practices that you wouldn't otherwise have been doing to get that? How do you see that being implemented and impacting your operations? Anybody? Yeah, everybody. We start with Dee, but anybody's got comments?
When that came out about a week ago, we did a little analysis, and what we discovered is that if a guy in Texas, the panhandle there, is buying 65% coverage, he's basically getting about $40 per acre in subsidy. So in fact, what it would do is limit it to about a 1,000-acre farm. You can go to your banker, and there's not very many 1,000-acre farms. They just don't, in our area, they just don't work. You know, you have to be larger to get the efficiency of scale. And so what you have is a situation where you either have to go to your banker and say, well, I'm sorry, but I can insure 1,000 acres, and everything after that, well, it's on its own, or take a well work coverage. Maybe you can go to 5,100, but then you have to go back to your banker as well and say, I'm insuring my crop for less than what I did last year. So it's going to have a tremendous impact. I mean, if that policy was enacted, it'd be a terrible policy. As far as conservation compliance, you know, I exceed what is in my conservation plan anyway. I'm strictly a strip till and no-till farmer. That's not in my conservation plan. It goes above and beyond what I have to do. And as you mentioned, you know, our land is what we do. It's our biggest asset. Why would we jeopardize it by misusing it or abusing it?
Sure. Mr. Scott?
As I read that GAO report, it was going through my mind something that I could equate this to, that we could get our heads around. And as I thought about natural disasters hitting different communities in this country, in essence, putting those limits on would be like saying that we're going to give a FEMA disaster declaration and assistance to Chicago, the same as we're going to give to Mineola, Kansas. Things are at scale in this country, and our ag production entities are that same way. And just like I said, are we going to limit farm size to 1,000 acres, or that's going to dictate what kind of risk you're going to be able to take?
I think we're getting into that philosophical area real quick and deep in the weeds. But when we help other things and other industries in this country, let's say we're going to build a wind farm, we don't tell the wind farm people that we're going to help you build the first 8 windmills, and then you're going to have to build the other 27 on your own. We help them build all of them. We don't help the airlines with a few. We decided that the airline industry needs to be a mom and pop operation, and we're not going to let you have a few airplanes. We think you can serve, with that. And so why do we not treat agriculture as a business like we do other things? And we're required to do that when we get financing. We're required to do that. Our country encourages growth, encourages progress, and it seems to me like, and pardon me if I'm getting a little bit sensitive here, it seems to me like the ag community is the only one that's looked on disparagingly when we grow. And we have some problems.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kansas for 5 minutes. Mr. Huelskamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first question will be for Mr. Harshberger. I had invited, I met someone from the EPA to come here and listen. And it's my understanding that thousands of folks work there. No one had time to come and listen. But if they were here, what would you tell them about your desire to protect the environment on your family farm?
It was mentioned by Mr. Swanson, it's about the dirt. And I've always stated that farmers are active environmentalists. Our livelihood depends upon the health of that dirt. So we are the world's conservationists. Now, there are some things that we can help with, like for instance, with the water authority. And in eastern Kansas, we have an issue of sedimentation in our reservoirs. And so with funds like EQIP and AWEP, we're able to enhance the stream beds to avoid that sedimentation. So there's things that we're already doing. We're already in tune with what we need for our farms, for our dirt. There's some things that we can have assistance on to take us to the next step forward. But I think we are the first active environmentalists.
Mr. Miller, a question. You mentioned exports, and I have a broad background in that. Can you describe for the committee and the folks here what our foreign competitors do and that make it difficult for us to compete internationally?
Yes, our foreign competitors, for one thing, all have animal ID, and it's mandatory, and that particular issue is causing us a lot of grief overseas. If you noticed, China just recently decided to take exports from Canada, and we're still not in there, and the only reason they did so is because they had mandatory ID in Canada. That's becoming to be a major issue for our country doing business overseas. A lot of your businesses in Japan, Korea, and places like that actually have TV monitors set up, and you can scan a barcode on the product and actually see where the product comes from. The consumer is driving it over there, and it's an issue that we haven't been able to address here in the U.S. The pork side does have mandatory ID, but the beef side doesn't. So that's an issue we're going to have to tackle somehow through either incentive, through voluntary, or some other method. But exports are booming overseas. The demand's there. The reports say that we have to double production by the year 2050, and in order to be able to feed all the people that are going to be in the world. And we're in a prime area to produce a lot of product and ship it overseas and make a profit. But we have to make sure that we have the right safety nets here now so that we all can stay in business and be able to produce that food and ship it overseas.
Thank you. Mr. Swanson, what are your thoughts on conservation programs, the number of programs we have? There have been proposals to consolidate those, consolidate applications. Your area, the epicenter of the Dust Bowl, wonder if you could talk talk a little bit about that.
Well, I'm all for improving bureaucratic efficiency. And if, that's, can you say those two words in the same sentence? I'm not sure. But at the same time, we do know that in order to administer something, we have to have a bureaucracy to do it. And so if those consolidations make the product that the farmer needs, the producer needs, the rancher needs, a better product, it makes it easier to access and to implement, I'm all for it. And if it saves us money in the process, I'm all for it. But I think that we really do need to strengthen our relationship with the local soil conservation boards. They know what's going on, they know what to work in their area, they know what those things are, and those bureaucracies need to listen to them. And so I guess that's not a very good answer to a very good question.
Not a very good question, I hope that was fine. So, Mr. Vaughan, I have a little time for one more question. Just curious, talk about your cost of production, that you can say generally what it is today, what it was compared to say 5 years ago for say corn.
It's been up and down like a roller coaster over the last few years. In 2008, it peaked. It's approximately about $4.50 a bushel for a bushel of corn that year because of high natural gas costs. We irrigate, we use natural gas, and it was a backbreaker that year. Fertilizer costs
for that year roughly?
Pardon me?
What's your average sale price that year?
Approximately around, we had forward contracted a lot of production earlier and sold it for in the $4.50 to $5 range, so it was basically a break-even year, even though USDA reported record farm income that year. I talked to a lot of producers that were in the same boat. It's back down now because of energy costs. Natural gas, of course, is much cheaper than it was in 2008, so we're back down considerably.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I'd like to once again acknowledge the outstanding insights that the first panel provided to us today and dismiss you gentlemen. Thank you for your participation, and we'll now call the second panel of witnesses today.